The crimson light of Rithia's sun filtered through the canopy, casting blood-red shadows across the jungle floor. Dr. Elena Park adjusted her atmospheric mask and checked her equipment readings for the fifth time. The air was breathable technically, but carried trace elements of toxins that accumulated in human tissue over time. Long-term exposure could lead to organ failure, and nobody wanted that, especially not in a place nicknamed Murder World. "Final equipment check complete," Elena said into her wrist recorder. "Commencing observation mission of the Crozel Territory galactic date, 3189.27. From her vantage point aboard the Orbita 7 space station that hovered in permanent orbit around Rithia, the planet looked deceptively beautiful. Swirls of crimson clouds against a backdrop of dense vegetation, with scattered blue lakes that reflected the red sun. It was only when you got closer that you understood why the Galactic Union classified it as a Class 5 hazardous world. Elena glanced at the holographic projections that surrounded her in the preparation chamber. Three-dimensional images of various Rithian predators rotated slowly, each labeled with scientific data and danger classifications. Her gaze lingered on the most imposing of them, all the Crozel. 4 meters tall at the shoulder, covered in obsidian scales that absorbed light rather than reflected it, with eyes that glowed like embers in darkness. The hologram couldn't possibly capture the creature's true menace. Only 17 humans had ever seen a live Crozel up close. 5 had survived the encounter. "You sure about this, Park?" The voice came from behind her, gruff, but tinged with concern. Elena turned to face Commander Harrison, the station's security chief. His weathered face bore the scars of someone who had spent decades on frontier worlds. "As sure as I was the last 3 times I went down there," she replied with a half-smile. "The quarterly survey is standard procedure." "Yeah, but most frontier ecologists map their territories from the safety of an armored shuttle," Harrison said, crossing his arms. "You're the only one crazy enough to insist on ground observation." Elena shrugged as she packed the last of her equipment into her field bag. "Remote observation only tells us so much. To truly understand apex predator behavior, you need to see them in their natural habitat responding to real stimuli. Just make sure you're not the real stimulus they respond to," Harrison muttered. "We lost 2 researchers last year to the Rexus Pax alone." "Don't worry," Elena said, her voice betraying a slight tremor that contradicted her confident words. "I'm not getting anywhere near a Crozel, just mapping their territorial markers from a safe distance." Harrison grunted, clearly unconvinced, but stepped aside to let her pass. "Your patrol shuttle leaves in 20 minutes. Don't miss it, or you'll have to wait another 2 days for the next magnetic window." As Elena walked toward the launch bay, her excitement competed with a steady undercurrent of fear. Humans had been part of the Galactic Union for over 2 centuries now, but they were still considered something of a curiosity, a species that had achieved space travel, despite being, from a biological standpoint, remarkably vulnerable. No natural armor, no venomous capabilities, modest strength, and mediocre sensory perception. In the complex hierarchy of galactic species, humans were respected for their intelligence and adaptability, but pitied for their physical limitations. On worlds like Rithia, those limitations became painfully apparent. The shuttle bay was a hive of activity, with technicians preparing various vessels for departure. Elena's craft was one of the smallest, a nimble patrol vessel designed for atmospheric entry and short-range reconnaissance. It lacked the heavy armaments of a military ship, but compensated with advanced cloaking and sensor technology. Dr. Park, a blue-skinned Andorian technician, greeted her with a nod. "Your vessel is prepped and ready. We've upgraded the sensory array as requested and installed the new pheromone collection modules." "Perfect," Elena said, running her hand along the shuttle's sleek metallic hull. "Any word on atmospheric conditions?" "There's a minor magnetic storm building in the southern hemisphere, but your flight path should avoid it entirely," the technician responded. "Standard procedures: stay within your designated zone, and if you encounter any Class 4 predators or higher, initiate immediate evacuation." Elena nodded, having heard the same briefing countless times before. The Galactic Union's Frontier Science Division didn't lack for safety protocols, they just happened to be studying environments where safety was a relative concept. As she boarded the shuttle and strapped herself into the pilot's seat, Elena felt the familiar mixture of dread and exhilaration that accompanied every mission to Rithia. The feeling had only intensified over the 3 years she'd been studying the planet's ecosystem. Each trip revealed new insights, new behaviors, new adaptations that rewrote scientific understanding of predator-prey dynamics. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and Elena guided it smoothly out of the bay. The stars stretched before her with Rithia's red mass growing larger as she approached. She activated the autopilot for the orbital descent sequence and used the time to review her objectives once more. Map the new territorial markers of the Krazel in Sector 7B. Document any changes in hunting patterns. Set up 3 new observation drones in strategic locations. Collect environmental samples for toxicity analysis. Simple routine tasks that shouldn't take more than 12 hours planetside. She'd be back aboard Orbita 7 in time for dinner. The shuttle shuddered as it entered Rithia's upper atmosphere. Elena frowned at a sudden fluctuation in the navigation readings. "That's odd," she muttered, tapping the console. The magnetic interference was stronger than the briefing had indicated. The shuttle's trajectory was already shifting slightly from its programmed descent path. Elena switched from autopilot to manual control, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she attempted to compensate. The vessel groaned in protest as atmospheric forces battled against her corrections. "Orbita 7, this is Park," she said into the communications array. "I am encountering unexpected magnetic turbulence during descent, requesting updated navigation parameters." Static answered her, punctuated by fragments of words too distorted to comprehend. The magnetic storm must be interfering with communications as well. The shuttle lurched violently, throwing Elena against her restraints. Warning lights flashed across the console as systems began to fail in cascade sequence. The craft was spinning now, dropping altitude at an alarming rate. "Mayday, Mayday," Elena shouted, though she doubted anyone could hear her through the interference. "Shuttle experiencing catastrophic system failure. Emergency landing procedures initiated." She fought with the controls trying to guide the plummeting vessel toward a clearing she glimpsed through the chaos of her view screen. The treetops of Rithia's massive jungle rushed up to meet her red and black blurs that promised nothing but destruction. The last thing Elena remembered was the screeching of metal as the shuttle tore through the upper canopy, the sickening crunch of impact, and then darkness. Pain was her first sensation upon regaining consciousness, a sharp, insistent throbbing at her temple combined with a dull ache that seemed to permeate her entire body. Elena groaned and tentatively raised a hand to her head, feeling the sticky warmth of blood. Her eyes fluttered open to the dim red light of Rithia's perpetual dusk. The shuttle had crashed into a small clearing, though crashed seemed too mild a term for the devastation around her. The vessel was split nearly in half, with parts of the hull scattered in a debris field that stretched for at least 50 meters. Smoke rose from what remained of the engine compartment. Elena unbuckled her safety harness with trembling hands and assessed her condition. The cut on her head was bleeding, but not severely. Her left ankle protested when she tried to put weight on it, sprained possibly, but not broken. Various other cuts and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. The same could not be said for her situation. Her emergency beacon had been activated automatically during the crash, but there was no way to know if its signal could penetrate the magnetic interference. The communications array was completely destroyed. Worst of all, the shuttle's defensive perimeter generators designed to create an energy field that would repel Rithia's predators were offline. Elena dragged herself from the wreckage and salvaged what she could. Her personal field kit with basic research equipment, a small medipack, emergency rations sufficient for 3 days, a sidearm with a limited charge standard issue for frontier scientists, though barely adequate against the smallest of Rithian predators. As she took stock of her supplies, the reality of her predicament sank in. She was stranded in one of the most dangerous ecosystems in the galaxy, with minimal protection. The standard rescue protocol required waiting by the crash site, but without the defensive perimeter, that would be suicide. The sun was setting, which meant the nocturnal predators would soon begin their hunts. Elena needed shelter, and quickly. She gathered her salvage supplies into her field pack and oriented herself using the planetary positioning system on her wrist device, one of the few pieces of technology still functioning correctly. She was deep in Sector 7B, precisely the Krazel territory she had intended to study, albeit from a much safer altitude. The irony was not lost on her. Elena limped toward a rock formation, about 200 meters from the crash site, hoping it might offer some protection for the night. Each step was painful, but fear proved an excellent motivator. The forest around her teemed with sound, chirping, howling, hissing, a symphony of predator and prey that under other circumstances she would have found fascinating. She had nearly reached the rocks when the sounds abruptly ceased. Silence on Rithia was never a good sign. Elena froze her hand, moving slowly to the sidearm, holstered at her hip. Years of field experience had taught her that sudden quiet usually meant one thing: a top-tier predator had entered the area, and every other creature was trying to avoid becoming its dinner. A low, rumbling growl emanated from the dense vegetation to her right, deep and resonant, unlike anything made by the smaller predators she had encountered before. Elena turned, weapon drawn, as the undergrowth parted. First came the eyes, glowing red embers in the gathering darkness. Then, the massive head emerged, obsidian scales catching what little light remained and reflecting nothing. The Krazel stood at least 4 meters tall, its elongated reptilian body supported by 6 muscular limbs that ended in hooked claws. A row of spines ran from the base of its skull, down its back, vibrating slightly as it growled again. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The creature was magnificent, a perfect example of evolutionary dominance, untouched by human interference. The very specimen she had hoped to observe from a safe distance. Only now there was no distance at all. The Krazel's nostrils flared as it scented the air, its head swinging toward her with predatory precision. Those ember eyes locked onto her, and Elena saw in them something that sent a chill down her spine: intelligence. Not just instinct, but calculation. Her fingers tightened on her weapon, though she knew it would do little more than annoy the beast. The Krazel's scales could deflect most energy weapons, and even if she managed to wound it, that would only enrage it further. The creature took a step forward, its movement silent, despite its massive size. Another step. It was stalking her, taking its time, assessing its prey, with the confidence of something that had never known defeat. "I did not expect to meet you quite this way," Elena whispered, her scientific mind still active despite her terror. She activated the recording function on her wrist device. If nothing else, her final encounter might provide valuable data for the next researcher. The Krazel tilted its head slightly at the sound of her voice, as if curious. Then it reared back and released a roar that shook the very air around them, a declaration of intent that needed no translation. The hunt had begun. Elena ran. She abandoned any pretense of dignity or scientific observation and simply fled, ignoring the pain in her ankle and the rational part of her mind that told her running was useless. The Krazel was faster, stronger, and had evolved specifically to chase down prey in this environment. But Elena had something the creature's usual prey did not: knowledge of predator behavior and the creativity to use it. She zigzagged through the trees, making as much noise as possible, the opposite of what most prey would do. She knocked over loose branches, shouted at the top of her lungs, and even fired her weapon into the air. The Krazel paused, momentarily confused by this unusual behavior. Prey typically tried to move silently to hide. This strange, soft creature was doing the opposite, creating a cacophony that echoed through the forest. Elena used the moment of confusion to duck behind a massive tree trunk and pull a small device from her pack, a basic environmental sampler that included a heating element for preparing specimens. She quickly recalibrated it to its highest setting and tossed it in the opposite direction from where she intended to flee. The device clattered noisily against stone, its heating element, beginning to glow red-hot. It would emit a heat signature similar to a small mammal, potentially drawing the Crozzel's attention. Without waiting to see if her decoy worked, Elena limped hurriedly toward a series of interconnected pools she had spotted during her initial flight. Rithia's waterways were often acidic and dangerous, but they might mask her scent. Behind her, she heard the Crozzel's growl again, lower this time, tinged with what almost sounded like confusion. Elena risked a glance back and saw the creature approaching her discarded device, its head-low nostrils flaring as it investigated this unusual heat source. The distraction wouldn't last long. She needed to reach the water. Elena splashed into the first pool, wincing as the slightly acidic liquid stung the cuts on her legs. She waded carefully, testing each step to avoid deeper sections, and made her way toward the far shore where dense vegetation promised some cover. A thunderous roar told her the Crozzel had discovered her ruse and was back on her trail. The ground trembled with the impact of its 6 limbs as it charged through the forest toward the pools. Elena reached the opposite bank and crawled into the underbrush, coating herself with the pungent mud at the water's edge to further mask her scent. Through the gaps in the vegetation, she watched as the massive predator arrived at the water's edge, its ember eyes scanning the pools. The Crozzel lowered its head to the water, tasting Elena's scent trail with its forked tongue. It looked up directly toward her hiding place and made a sound she hadn't heard before, something between a purr and a chuckle. It knew exactly where she was. And worse, it seemed to be enjoying the chase. The Crozzel didn't immediately charge across the water to seize its prey. Instead, it paced along the edge of the pool, its eyes never leaving the vegetation where Elena hid. It was toying with her, savoring the hunt. Elena's scientific mind cataloged this behavior, even as her survival instincts screamed at her to run again. This wasn't typical predator behavior. Most efficient hunters sought to end the chase quickly, conserving energy. The Crozzel was deliberately prolonging the hunt, displaying a level of psychological complexity she would have found fascinating under different circumstances. "You're not just hungry, are you?" she whispered, more to herself than the creature. "You're bored." The realization gave her an idea, a desperate one, but her options were rapidly dwindling. Elena checked her pack. Among her salvaged equipment was a small canister of sensory stimulant, a compound designed to attract smaller Rithian species for study. If the Crozzel was seeking stimulation as much as sustenance. She carefully extracted the canister and modified its release valve to empty its contents all at once, rather than the gradual dispersion it was designed for. Then, taking a deep breath, she burst from her hiding place and ran parallel to the water's edge, away from both the Crozzel and the direction of her crashed shuttle. The predator roared in what sounded almost like approval and gave chase exactly as she had hoped. Its massive form crashed through the vegetation behind her, gaining ground with each powerful stride. Elena pushed herself to run faster, fighting through the pain in her ankle, leading the creature toward a patch of ground that looked solid, but which her trained eye recognized as a disguised mud pit, a natural trap that had claimed countless unwary animals. When she was just meters from the pit, Elena activated the canister and hurled it directly into the deceptive ground. The stimulant burst outward in a cloud of particles that immediately began to sink into the mud, creating a potent scent lure. She veered sharply to the right, circling wide around the pit. The Crozzel focused on the intense sensory signature of the stimulant, charged directly toward it, and plunged headlong into the concealed mud pit. The creature's roar of triumph transformed into one of surprise, and then rage, as it found itself suddenly mired in thick, clinging mud that reached halfway up its massive body. It thrashed violently, sending globs of mud flying in all directions as it fought to free itself. Elena didn't stay to watch. She used the distraction to put as much distance between herself and the trapped predator as possible, heading for higher ground where she might find shelter for the night. As she climbed a rocky slope, The sounds of the Krazel's struggles grew fainter. Elena allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps the pit would hold the creature long enough for a rescue team to locate her. That hope was short-lived. A triumphant roar echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls. The Krazel had freed itself and was once again on her trail, and now it was angry. Elena reached the top of the ridge and surveyed her surroundings in the fading light. The crimson sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. In the distance, she could see the distinctive silhouette of a Rithian rock forest, towering stone formations eroded into spire-like structures, with countless crevices and caves. If she could reach it before complete darkness, she might find a hiding place too small for the Krazel to follow. The hunt had become a battle of wits, now her intelligence against the creature's primal cunning. Each time she employed a new tactic, the Krazel seemed to adapt, learning from its mistakes. It was no longer simply chasing her. It was analyzing her patterns, anticipating her strategies. Elena set several false trails as she made her way toward the rock forest, broken branches, pointing in the wrong direction, discarded pieces of equipment, left as decoys. She circled back on her own path, crossed water whenever possible, and even used her remaining stimulant to create confusion. Night had fallen completely by the time she reached the first of the stone spires. Rithia's 3 moons cast an eerie, multicolored glow over the landscape, providing just enough light to navigate. Elena's body ached with exhaustion. Her water supply was dangerously low, and her injured ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. But she was still alive. She found a narrow crevice between 2 rock formations, just wide enough for her to squeeze through, but far too small for the Krazel. Inside was a small cave, sheltered from the elements, and hopefully from predatory eyes. Elena collapsed onto the stone floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She allowed herself 5 minutes of rest, no more, no less, before forcing herself to take stock of her situation. Her communication device was still non-functional. The emergency beacon in her pack continued to transmit, but there was no way to know if anyone was receiving its signal. Her food would last 3 days if she rationed carefully. Water was the more immediate concern. She had less than a day's supply remaining. As she conducted this grim inventory, a familiar sound froze her in place. The low, rumbling growl of the Krazel, much closer than expected. Elena peered cautiously through the crevice entrance to her hiding place. The massive predator stood at the base of the rock formation, its ember eyes scanning the stone faces as if it knew exactly where she had gone. Its obsidian scales were caked with half-dried mud from the pit trap, giving it a mottled appearance in the moonlight. The Krazel began to circle the rock formation, occasionally rising onto its hind limbs to peer into higher crevices. It was methodically searching for her, with a patience that defied conventional predator behavior. Elena retreated deeper into her cave, hoping the creature would eventually give up and seek easier prey. She used the time to treat her injured ankle as best she could with her limited medical supplies, and to formulate a plan for the next day. She must have dozed off despite her fear, because she awoke with a start to a strange sound, a rhythmic scraping noise coming from outside her hiding place. Dawn's crimson light filtered through the crevice, illuminating the small cave. Elena cautiously approached the entrance and peered out. What she saw chilled her blood. The Krazel hadn't left during the night. Instead, it had settled into a resting position at the base of the rock formation, its body curled around the stone like a siege engine. More disturbing still, it appeared to be sharpening its massive claws against the rock face, the source of the scraping sound that had awakened her. The creature looked up suddenly, as if sensing her gaze, and locked eyes with her through the narrow crevice. Its mouth opened in what Elena could only interpret as a grin, revealing rows of serrated teeth, designed for ripping flesh from bone. The message was clear. It knew exactly where she was, and it was prepared to wait. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was a siege. Elena retreated into the cave, her mind racing. The Krazel was displaying behavior far more complex than anything documented in previous studies. It wasn't simply reacting to stimuli or following instinct, it was strategizing, adapting, learning. And it had decided that she was worth the effort. As the day progressed, Elena carefully rationed her remaining water and listened to the Krazel's movements outside. Occasionally, it would scrape its claws against the stone or release a low growl as if to remind her of its presence. It was a psychological tactic meant to wear down her resistance. By midday, Elena had formulated a new plan, one born of desperation and scientific curiosity in equal measure. If she couldn't escape the predator, perhaps she could change the nature of their interaction. She spent the afternoon preparing tearing strips from her uniform to create a makeshift torch, combining chemicals from her research kit to create a bright, smoky flame. As dusk approached, she steeled herself for what might be her final gambit. Elena emerged from the crevice as the first of Rithia's moons rose above the horizon. The Krazel, which had been dozing in the fading light, immediately snapped to alertness, its ember eyes fixing on her with predatory intensity. Instead of running, Elena stood her ground. She ignited her makeshift torch, creating a bright, sputtering flame that cast dancing shadows across the rock formations. "You want stimulation," she called out, her voice steady, despite her fear. "Let's try something new." She began to move the torch in patterns, creating shapes with the flame and smoke, simple at first, then increasingly complex. The Krazel watched, its head tilted in what appeared to be curiosity. Elena continued using the torch to draw, in the air circles, square spirals. Then, in a moment of inspiration, she traced the outline of a Krazel, complete with its distinctive spines and 6 limbs. The creature's reaction was immediate and startling. It rose onto its hind limbs, reaching nearly 7 meters in height, and released a rumbling sound unlike anything Elena had heard before. Not a roar or a growl, but something almost interrogative. Encouraged, Elena continued her flame drawing this time, creating an image of herself standing beside the Krazel. She was anthropomorphizing wildly now, projecting human concepts onto an alien predator, but something told her she was on the right track. The Krazel lowered itself to all 6 limbs and took a step forward, then another, approaching slowly, rather than charging. When it was just meters away, it stopped and extended its neck, bringing its massive head level with Elena's. They stood there, human and predator, separated by mere meters, close enough for Elena to feel the heat radiating from the creature's body and smell the musky scent of its scales. Then, in a movement so sudden, Elena had no time to react. The Krazel's forked tongue flicked out lightly, touching her face before retracting. It was tasting her scent, her fear, her essence. Elena remained frozen, certain that her death was imminent. Instead, the Krazel made that strange interrogative sound again, and then slowly, deliberately used one massive claw to scratch a line in the dirt at its feet. Then another line crossing the first. Then a circle around them. Elena stared in disbelief. The creature was mimicking her actions, creating its own crude symbols in response to hers. It wasn't just intelligent, it was communicative. The realization was staggering. If she survived this encounter, it would revolutionize xenobiology. More importantly, it might be her key to survival. The moment of potential breakthrough was shattered by a distant, high-pitched howl, followed by another and another. The Krazel's head snapped up, its spines rigidly extending as it released a warning growl. Elena recognized the sounds immediately, Rexus pack predators that hunted in groups of 12 to 20 individuals. Smaller than the Krazel, but far more numerous, with razor-sharp mandibles, capable of cutting through even the toughest hide. The howls were getting closer. The pack must have detected the scent of the crashed shuttle, or perhaps Elena's blood trail from her earlier flight. Either way, they were approaching rapidly. The Krazel turned its attention from Elena to the direction of the howls, its body language shifting from curious to defensive. It released a thunderous roar, a territorial challenge to the approaching pack. Elena seized the opportunity to retreat to her crevice, But to her surprise, the Krazel swung its massive tail to block her path. It wasn't letting her escape. For a moment, Elena thought the creature intended to keep her as its own meal, rather than lose her to the Rexus. Then the Krazel did something extraordinary. It lowered its body to the ground in a clear invitation for her to climb onto its back. Elena hesitated, torn between the certain danger of the approaching Rexus and the unpredictable intentions of the Krazel. The creature made an impatient sound, its tail twitching as the howls grew closer. Making a decision that defied all survival logic, Elena climbed onto the Krazel's back, positioning herself between the rows of spines that could be raised or lowered at will. The creature's scales were surprisingly warm to the touch, vibrating slightly with the powerful muscles beneath. As soon as she was secure, the Krazel rose and charged away from the rock formation, carrying Elena deeper into its territory. Its 6 limbs moved with astonishing speed and coordination, covering ground at a pace no human could match. Elena clung desperately to the creature's spines, her scientific mind recording every detail of this unprecedented experience, even as she wondered if she was being carried to safety or simply to a more private location for consumption. The first of the Rexus appeared as sleek, wolf-like forms, with insectoid features 6-limbed like the Krazel, but smaller and lighter, with exoskeletons rather than scales. They darted through the underbrush with predatory grace, their mandibles clicking in excitement at the prospect of a hunt. The Krazel skidded to a halt in a small clearing, depositing Elena roughly on the ground, before positioning itself between her and the approaching pack. It extended its spines to their full length, making itself appear even larger, and released a roar that shook the very air. The message was unmistakable: this prey belongs to me. The Rexus pack hesitated at the edge of the clearing, their compound eyes glittering in the moonlight as they assessed the situation. They outnumbered the Krazel significantly, but each individual was no match for the apex predator. After a brief consultation of clicks and hisses, the pack began to circle the clearing, looking for weakness, testing the Krazel's resolve. One Rexus darted forward, feinting toward Elena before quickly retreating. The Krazel responded with a lightning-fast strike of its tail, missing the smaller predator, but demonstrating its speed. Another Rexus attempted to approach from a different angle, and this time, the Krazel's claws connected, sending the creature flying into the underbrush with a screech of pain. The pack responded with a chorus of angry howls. Elena knew she was witnessing something unprecedented, a Krazel defending a human, rather than hunting one. But she also recognized that despite its formidable abilities, the apex predator could not hold off the entire pack indefinitely. She needed to help to form a true partnership if either of them was to survive. Elena slowly reached into her pack and withdrew her emergency flares, bright, long-burning magnesium torches designed to signal rescue craft. The Rexus, like many Rithian species, had light-sensitive compound eyes, adapted for the planet's perpetual dusk. "Hey!" she called softly to the Krazel, which flicked an ear-like appendage in her direction, without taking its eyes off the circling pack. "I have an idea." Elena ignited the first flare, which burst into brilliant white light. The effect on the Rexus was immediate. They recoiled, their mandibles clicking in distress, as their sensitive eyes struggled to adjust to the sudden brightness. The Krazel, with eyes better adapted to varying light conditions, seemed to understand Elena's strategy immediately. It charged toward the momentarily blinded pack members, scattering them with powerful swipes of its claws. Elena lit a second flare and hurled it into a different section of the pack, creating another zone of confusion. The Krazel coordinated its attacks with her flares, focusing its aggression on the Rexus, most affected by the light. Working together, human ingenuity and apex predator strength, they drove the pack back toward the forest edge. Several Rexus lay wounded or dead, while the others began a tactical retreat, their collective intelligence recognizing that this unusual partnership presented a challenge they were not equipped to overcome. As the last of the pack disappeared into the underbrush, Elena sank to her knees in exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to ebb, leaving her trembling and lightheaded from fatigue and dehydration. The Krazel turned its attention back to her approaching, with a cautious deliberation that suggested it was reassessing their relationship in light of this new cooperation. It lowered its massive head to her level, those ember eyes studying her with unmistakable intelligence. Elena mustered her courage and slowly extended her hand, palm up, a gesture of peace, or perhaps gratitude. The Krazel regarded her hand for a long moment, then gently, with surprising delicacy, for such a massive creature, pressed its snout against her palm. The contact was electric, warm scales against human skin, predator and prey transcending their biological roles to form something new, something unprecedented. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her scientific detachment completely abandoned in the face of this extraordinary moment. "For not eating me." The Krazel made that rumbling purr-like sound again, which Elena was beginning to interpret as amusement. It then stepped back and used a claw to scratch another symbol in the dirt, a crude representation of Elena's flare, and what appeared to be a Rexus fleeing from it. It was communicating, acknowledging their teamwork. Elena laughed in disbelief. "You understood what we did, didn't you? We're a good team." The Krazel tilted its head, then lowered its body to the ground once more, in that same invitation posture. Elena hesitated only briefly before climbing onto its back again. Whatever was happening between them, she was committed to seeing it through. The predator carried her through the red-tinged forest, moving with purpose, rather than the random pattern of a hunt. Elena realized they were heading toward higher ground, a plateau that overlooked much of the surrounding territory. When they reached the edge of the plateau, the Krazel deposited her gently, and then settled beside her, its massive body creating a windbreak against the cool night air. From this vantage point, they could see for kilometers in all directions, including the thin plume of smoke that still rose from Elena's crashed shuttle. The three moons of Rithia created a spectacular light show as they moved across the sky, casting shifting shadows and multicolored glows across the landscape. Elena found herself relaxing, despite the inherent danger of her situation. Something fundamental had changed in her relationship with the Krazel. She was no longer prey, she was something else. As dawn broke over Rithia, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Elena awoke to find herself curled against the warm scales of the Krazel, which had maintained its protective position throughout the night. The creature was already awake, its ember eyes scanning the territory below with predatory vigilance. Elena took stock of her situation. Her water was nearly gone, her food supplies limited, and her emergency beacon had been transmitting for over 24 hours, with no response. The magnetic storm that had caused her crash must still be interfering with signals. She needed to find water soon and assess whether any of the communication equipment from the shuttle could be salvaged. The Krazel seemed to sense her restlessness and rose to its feet, stretching its massive limbs in a manner that reminded Elena incongruously of a cat. "I need to find water," she said, pointing to her empty canteen. "And maybe check the shuttle again." The Krazel considered her for a moment, then bent low in its now familiar invitation. Elena climbed onto its back, and they descended from the plateau at a measured pace. Instead of heading toward the crashed shuttle, however, the creature took her deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be a game trail. After about 20 minutes of travel, they emerged at the edge of a small lake, fed by a waterfall cascading from a rocky outcrop. Unlike many of Rithia's acidic water sources, this one appeared clear and showed signs of regular use by local wildlife. Elena cautiously tested the water with her chemical analyzer and found it safe for human consumption. She gratefully refilled her canteen and drank deeply, then took the opportunity to wash the dirt and dried blood from her face and arms. The Krazel watched her ablutions with evident curiosity before lowering its own massive head to drink. After slaking its thirst, it moved to the edge of the clearing and began to dig at the base of a thorny shrub with its claws. Elena approached cautiously to see what had caught the creature's attention. The Krazel unearthed what looked like tuberous roots, which it pushed toward her with a claw. "Are these for me?" Elena asked, examining the unfamiliar plant matter. The Krazel made an affirmative-sounding rumble. Her analyzer indicated the tubers contained complex carbohydrates and proteins with no detectable toxins harmful to humans. Tentatively, Elena bit into one. The flesh was starchy and slightly sweet, similar to a cross between a potato and a water chestnut. "It's good," she said, surprised. "Thank you." The Krazel seemed pleased by her acceptance of its offering, settling into a watchful posture, while Elena ate her fill of the nutritious tubers. For a creature that had initially seen her as prey, it was now actively ensuring her survival. After she had eaten and replenished her water supply, Elena made gestures to indicate she needed to return to the shuttle. The Krazel understood immediately, transporting her swiftly through the forest to the crash site. The wreckage looked even worse in daylight. Elena set about salvaging what she could, focusing on the communication array, which had been partially protected by the shuttle's reinforced hull. The Krazel prowled the perimeter, occasionally lifting its head to scent the air, or emit a low, warning growl that kept other predators at bay. After several hours of work, Elena managed to cobble together a rudimentary transmitter, using parts from her personal equipment and the shuttle's backup systems. It wouldn't be powerful enough to reach Orbita 7 directly, but it might be able to boost her emergency beacon signal, enough to penetrate the magnetic interference. As she worked, Elena found herself talking to the Krazel, explaining her actions and thoughts, as if the creature could understand every word. Perhaps it couldn't comprehend her language, but it seemed to appreciate the communication, nonetheless, occasionally responding with rumbles or gestures of its own. "If this works," Elena said as she made the final adjustments to her makeshift transmitter, "a rescue shuttle might arrive within 12 hours. The question is..." She looked up at the Krazel, which was watching her work with evident fascination. "What happens then?" The creature tilted its head questioningly. "You've completely upended everything we thought we knew about your species." Elena continued securing the last connection on her device. "You're not just an apex predator. You're intelligent, communicative, capable of complex problem-solving, and even cooperation with other species. That changes everything." The Krazel approached and used a claw to scratch another symbol in the soil beside her, a rough approximation of the shuttle, with a line drawn from it toward the sky. "Yes, the shuttle will come from up there," Elena confirmed, pointing upward. "But will you let me go, and if you do, would you let me come back?" The creature considered her for a long moment, those ember eyes, revealing nothing of its thoughts. Then it scratched a new symbol, a simple circle with a line through it, next to what appeared to be a representation of Elena herself. She struggled to interpret this new communication. "You don't want me to leave, or you don't want me to leave alone." The Krazel made a gesture with its claws that Elena was beginning to recognize as frustration at the limitations of their communication. It tried a different approach, using its tail to sweep away the previous symbols and starting fresh. This time, it drew what was unmistakably Elena, then itself, then several other Krazel-like shapes, all arranged in a protective circle around the Elena figure. "You want to introduce me to others of your kind?" Elena asked, astonished by the implication. "Like a formal alliance." The creature made the affirmative rumbling sound, adding another symbol that resembled the Rexus pack, fleeing from their combined defense. Elena sat back on her heels, momentarily forgetting her transmitter, as the full implications sank in. The Krazel wasn't just treating her as an unusual curiosity or a temporary ally. It was proposing something far more significant, a lasting relationship between their species beginning with this initial contact. This goes beyond anything I could have imagined." Elena said, her scientific mind racing with possibilities. "If your entire species is capable of this level of cooperation and communication..." She was interrupted by a beeping from her wrist device, the first electronic communication she had received since the crash. Elena quickly checked the display and felt a surge of hope. Her cobbled-together transmitter was working. The signal was reaching through the magnetic interference at least partially. Dr. Park, respond. Location. The transmission was fragmented, but unmistakably from Orbita 7. Elena activated her communication device. This is Dr. Park. I'm alive and at the shuttle crash site. My coordinates are embedded in the emergency beacon signal. Receiving rescue shuttle. 6 hours, came the broken reply. I'm alive and well. Elena continued glancing at the Krazel, which was watching the exchange with evident interest. And I've made a discovery that will change our understanding of Rithian ecology forever. She waited, but no further transmission came through. The magnetic interference was still strong, but at least Orbita 7 had her location and knew she was alive. Rescue was coming. Elena turned to the Krazel, her expression serious. In 6 hours, a shuttle will arrive. Before then, I need to document everything about our interaction. Future researchers will need proof of what's happened here. The creatures seemed to understand the importance of this task settling nearby, as Elena set up her recording equipment and began to document their extraordinary encounter in meticulous detail. She described the initial hunt, the chase through the forest, the moment when the Krazel had chosen to protect her rather than eat her, and their cooperative defense against the Rexus pack. Most importantly, she recorded the creature's attempts at communication, the symbols it had drawn, the evident intelligence behind its actions, and the proposal of an alliance between their species. As the hours passed, Elena continued her documentation, while the Krazel occasionally left to patrol the perimeter, always returning to check on her progress. The creatures seemed to recognize the significance of what they were creating together, a record of first true contact between humans and Krazel as sentient cooperative species, rather than predator and prey. When the distinctive sound of a shuttle's engines finally broke through the perpetual sounds of the Rithian jungle, Elena felt a complicated mixture of relief and reluctance. She was eager to return to the safety of Orbita 7 to proper medical treatment for her injuries, and to share her groundbreaking discoveries with her colleagues. But she was also surprisingly reluctant to leave the Krazel with whom she had formed a bond, unlike anything previously documented in xenobiology. The rescue shuttle appeared as a sleek silver craft breaking through the crimson clouds, guided by the signal from Elena's emergency beacon. It hovered above the clearing, created by her crash thrusters, stirring up debris as it prepared to land. The Krazel watched the approaching vessel with evident wariness, its spines extending slightly in a defensive posture. Elena placed a reassuring hand on the creature's flank. "It's okay," she said soothingly. "They're here to help me, but I haven't forgotten our agreement." The shuttle landed, and the hatch opened to reveal a team of armed security personnel, led by Commander Harrison himself, weapons at the ready. When they spotted Elena standing beside the massive form of the Krazel, their expressions shifted from determination to shock. "Dr. Park." Harrison called his weapon trained on the Krazel. "Move away from the creature, we'll cover you." Elena raised her hands in a calming gesture. "No, stand down, it's not a threat." The rescue team hesitated clearly, struggling to reconcile Elena's command with the sight of a human standing willingly beside Rithia's most feared predator. "Dr. Park," Harrison said slowly, his weapon still raised. "That's a Krazel. It's killed more researchers than any other species on this planet." "Not this one," Elena replied firmly. "This one saved my life, multiple times. And it's intelligent, far more intelligent than we ever realized. It can communicate reason, cooperate." Harrison's expression made it clear he thought she might be suffering from shock or some kind of Stockholm syndrome. "Just step away from it, doctor. We'll get you back to the station for medical evaluation." The Krazel, sensing the tension, released a low warning growl. The security team instantly tensed, fingers moving to triggers. "Stop!" Elena moved to position herself between the creature and the weapons. "If you fire on this Krazel, you'll be destroying the most significant xenobiological discovery of the century." I've documented everything, our communication, our cooperation against the Rexus pack, everything. This changes our entire understanding of Rithian ecology." Harrison lowered his weapon slightly, his expression uncertain. "You're saying it's sentient?" "Yes," Elena said emphatically. "And not just sentient, it's capable of symbolic communication, strategic thinking, and cross-species cooperation. It saved me from the Rexus when it could have just let them have me." The commander glanced at his team, then back at Elena and the imposing form of the Krizel. "That's a significant claim, Doctor." "One that I can prove," Elena countered, holding up her recording device. "And there's more. It wants to establish formal contact, to introduce me to others of its kind. Think about what that could mean for our operations on Rithia, for the Galactic Union's understanding of predator species." Harrison considered this for a long moment, then slowly lowered his weapon completely, signaling for his team to do the same. "All right, Doctor, if you're certain." "I am," Elena said with absolute conviction. The Krazel, seeing the humans lower their weapons, relaxed its defensive posture. It moved forward slowly, careful not to appear threatening, and used a claw to scratch a new symbol in the dirt, a circle containing smaller circles, which Elena had come to recognize as its representation of a group or community. "It's reaffirming its invitation," Elena explained to the astonished rescue team. "It wants us to meet its community, to establish formal relations." Harrison shook his head in disbelief. "The xenobiologists at Central are going to lose their minds over this." "This goes beyond xenobiology," Elena said, placing a hand on the Krazel's scales, in a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days ago. "This is about redefining our place in the galactic community. Humans have always been seen as physically inferior, relying on technology rather than natural abilities. But our capacity for communication, for forming connections across species barriers, that's our evolutionary advantage." She looked up at the Krazel, which was watching the exchange with evident interest. "And it seems we're not the only species to value that trait." The creature made a sound that Elena had begun to interpret as agreement, lowering its massive head to her level, in what seemed almost like a bow. "So what happens now?" Harrison asked, still keeping a cautious distance. Elena turned to face him fully, her expression determined. "Now we return to Orbita 7. I'll present my findings, get medical treatment, and prepare a formal research proposal for establishing diplomatic contact with the Krazel." She placed her hand on the creature's scales once more. "And then I'm coming back. We've been given an unprecedented opportunity here, a chance to form an alliance with a species we've always considered nothing more than predators. I don't intend to waste it." The Krazel rumbled its approval, using its claw to add one final symbol to its dirt communication, a simple representation of Elena and itself, side by side facing the same direction. "Partners, not predator and prey." As the rescue team cautiously loaded Elena's salvaged equipment onto the shuttle, she took a moment alone with the Krazel. The creature seemed to understand that she was leaving, but would return, showing none of the territorial aggression one would expect from a pure predator. "I'll be back," Elena promised, pressing her palm against the creature's snout. "And when I return, we'll build something new together, a bridge between our species." The Krazel made a sound that resembled nothing so much as a purr, then gently nudged her toward the waiting shuttle. It understood sacrifice and patience, the hallmarks of true intelligence. Elena walked toward the shuttle, limping slightly on her injured ankle, but moving with the confidence of someone who had faced the apex predator of an entire world and emerged not as prey, but as partner. As she boarded the vessel, she activated her communicator and sent a simple message to the waiting scientists aboard Orbita 7. "I've found Rithia's most powerful natural guardian, the Krazel, and it has claimed humanity, not as prey, but as royalty worth protecting." The shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting the craft slowly from the clearing. Through the viewport, Elena watched as the Krazel maintained its position, those ember eyes tracking the vessel's ascent until it disappeared into the crimson clouds. As Rithia receded behind her, Elena began to plan her return. The relationship she had formed with the Krizel was just the beginning, the first contact between two species that had always seen each other through the lens of predator and prey, now glimpsing a future where they might stand as equals. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where humans were often dismissed as physically inferior, they had found an unexpected ally in the most dangerous predator of Murder World, a creature that had evolved beyond mere hunting to recognize the value of intelligence, cooperation, and communication. The apex predator had claimed the human as prey. Now it guarded her like royalty. And in that transformation lay the promise of a new chapter in galactic history, one where strength and intelligence found common ground in the most unlikely of partnerships.